Yeah. The Literary Genealogy of Western Civilization. How 8 great books built and broke the West. Civilization does not merely produce its great books, it is, in a more profound sense, produced by them. A foundational text is never a passive mirror. It is a map that a culture draws of itself, and then, fatally, proceeds to follow. A meme. What follows is an examination of 8 such memes, from Homer to Milton, each of which provided the West with a successive theme to correct the errors of the previous age. Yet each map, in its precision and its blind spots, also encoded the geography of its own ruin. In tracing the protagonist's journey from Achilles' rage to Adam's exile, we discover a recurring pattern. The very virtue that elevates an empire to its zenith is also the flaw that condemns it to wander alone in the wilderness. The story of the West is not a linear march of progress, but a series of exiles from one garden after another, each book handing the next generation a key that locks the door behind it. 1. Homer's Iliad. Archaic classical Greece, circa 8th to 4th century BCE. The dominant empire embodying the Iliad is the fragile coalition of Greek city-states, who despite their shared language and gods, found themselves perpetually incapable of forming a lasting political union due to the very heroic individualism and zero-sum honor culture that Homer's epic immortalized. The protagonist's journey. Achilles, a warrior of semi-divine birth, seeks immortal glory, kleos, and personal honor. His obstacle is his own destructive pride, menace, and the realization that the heroic code which grants him eternal fame also guarantees his early, violent death. The flaw embedded in the text. The poem's central flaw is the institutionalization of menis, destructive wrath. While Homer doesn't glorify war, the epic immortalizes a value system where personal honor is tied to material spoils and zero-sum status. This model of heroic but brittle alliance politics replicated endlessly in the real-life conflicts between Greek city-states, e.g., the Peloponnesian War, where pride and the inability to compromise led to constant fratricide. How the meme went viral. The Iliad foreshadows the exhaustion of the Greek world. The poem is a story of a coalition on the verge of collapse due to internal ego, not external threat. This prefigured the inability of classical Greece to form a lasting political union, eventually leaving it vulnerable to conquest by Macedon and later Rome.
Rage, goddess, sing the rage of Peleus' son Achilles, murderous, doomed, that cost the Achaeans countless losses. Book 1, opening lines. Any moment might be a man's last. Why should a man cling to life, knowing there's no escape from death? Book 12.
Two, Virgil's Aeneid. Late Republic, Early Empire, circa 1st century BCE. The Roman Empire, having emerged from a century of bloody civil war, sought desperately to legitimize its newfound autocratic power under Augustus by fabricating a myth of divine destiny that demanded the systematic suppression of individual desire and the violent erasure of any who stood in the path of imperial expansion. The protagonist's journey. Aeneas, a refugee prince, seeks to found a new homeland. His obstacle is not a monster or enemy army alone, but the renunciation of personal desire, losing his wife Creusa, abandoning Dido, killing Turnus. He must learn to hate the self to serve the state. The flaw embedded in the text. The flaw Virgil encoded is emotional suppression for the sake of imperial duty. The poem teaches that to build Rome, Aeneas must kill Turnus in a fit of private vengeance, furor, immediately after being counseled to spare him. This legitimized a culture where the pursuit of Pax Romana was always shadowed by ruthless violence and the erasure of individual empathy for the greater good of the state. The Roman peace was often a piece of the graveyard for those who resisted. How the meme went viral. The Aeneid's prophecy of empire without end is undercut by the poem's own sadness. The cost of empire, the human sacrifice required to maintain the facade of order, foreshadowed the imperial overreach and internal rot that made Rome unsustainable. The system became too vast and impersonal to be governed by the very virtues Virgil tried to cement.
I sing of arms and the man, who suffered much in war until he could found a city and bring his gods to Latium. Book 1, opening. Do not yield to ill fortune, but go against it with more daring. Book 6. Roman, remember by your strength to rule earth's peoples? For your arts are to be these, to pacify, to impose the rule of law, to spare the conquered, battle down the proud. Book 6.
A. Augustine's City of God. Late Antiquity, Early Middle Ages, circa 5th to 10th century CE. The dominant institution embodying the City of God is the Holy Roman Church, which inherited the shattered remains of the Western Roman Empire and faced the monumental challenge of constructing a coherent spiritual and political order out of the rubble, while simultaneously convincing a traumatized populace that the visible collapse of the world's greatest earthly power was not a catastrophe, but a necessary purification. Protagonist journey. The pilgrim believer, the soul as a citizen of two cities. The journey is exile through the earthly city, which is doomed to fall, toward the heavenly city. The obstacle is the temptation of earthly attachment and the despair caused by the visible collapse of worldly empires, Rome. The flaw embedded in the text. The text's dualism, earthly city versus heavenly city, created a permanent ideological schism that devalued secular progress and inquiry. While it provided spiritual solace, it also justified a stagnant social hierarchy where earthly suffering was irrelevant compared to the afterlife. This contempt for the world mindset hampered the kind of scientific and political innovation that marked other eras, leading to a long period of institutional inertia and the Church's monopoly on truth. How the meme went viral. Augustine's division of authority created a 1,000-year power struggle between Pope and Emperor that ultimately weakened both. By asserting that all earthly kingdoms are inherently transient and flawed, the City of God contained an implicit prophecy. The medieval synthesis of faith and reason would inevitably crack under the weight of its own contradictions, simony, corruption, and political meddling.
Two cities have been formed by two loves, the earthly by the love of self, even to the contempt of God, the heavenly by the love of God, even to the contempt of self. Book 14, chapter 28. The heavenly city outlasts all earthly empires. It is not made with hands, and it is eternal. Book 23.
B. Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. Italian Renaissance, late Middle Ages, 1300–1550 CE. The dominant political landscape embodying the Divine Comedy is the fractious patchwork of Italian city-states, Florence, Milan, Venice, Rome, and Naples, whose citizens found themselves torn between the waning universal authority of the papacy and the rising secular ambitions of mercantile republics and local despots, all while navigating a profound spiritual crisis in which the soul's eternal destination had become dangerously entangled with the grubby machinery of partisan politics, banking, and vendetta. Protagonist's journey. Dante the Pilgrim, a middle-aged poet lost in a dark wood of midlife despair and political exile. His journey is a descent through hell, ascent up purgatory, and flight through paradise to achieve beatific vision. The obstacle is not a single foe, but the entire architecture of sin and attachment, the gravitational pull of earthly loyalties, Florence, faction, fame, romantic love, that must be systematically recognized, repented, and transcended before the soul can see God face to face. The flaw embedded in the text. Dante's great flaw is the sanctification of poetic vengeance and the confusion of divine justice with personal score settling. The Divine Comedy is a work of sublime theology, but it is also an elaborate act of literary retribution. Dante populates hell with his political enemies, living and dead, his theological rivals, and even popes he deems corrupt. The poem teaches that art can serve as the instrument of final judgment. The dark reproduction of this in the Italian Renaissance is the institutionalization of patronage-driven art as propaganda and weapon. The Medici, the Borgia, and the Sforza learned from Dante that the artist's pen, or brush, or chisel, could damn a rival and canonize a benefactor. The Renaissance's glorious explosion of creativity was underwritten by a culture of factional hatred, elevated to the level of aesthetic spectacle. The very beauty of the age masks a profound weaponization of the imagination, where the artist becomes the arbiter of who is remembered in glory and who is consigned to eternal infamy. How the meme went viral. The Divine Comedy attempts to build a perfect, ordered cosmos, a total synthesis of classical learning, Christian theology, and personal experience. Yet its very structure, which places a Florentine exile at the center of the universe and grants him the authority to judge popes and emperors, foreshadows the collapse of the universal into the particular. Dante's poem is a last, desperate attempt to hold the medieval synthesis together, but it is held together by the will of a single individual artist. This prefigures the fate of the Italian Renaissance itself. The city-states produced unparalleled genius, but they could never produce a unified Italy. Like Dante's Cosmos, which is beautiful but irreducibly centered on him, the Renaissance remained a constellation of brilliant, warring egos: Leonardo versus Michelangelo, Florence versus Venice, Pope versus Emperor. The decline was baked into the method. A civilization that elevates individual genius above communal authority produces masterpieces but cannot produce lasting political cohesion. The Italy of Dante's vision, a restored Holy Roman Empire under a purified papacy, never materialized. Instead, the peninsula became the playground and battlefield of foreign powers: France, Spain, the Habsburgs, for the next 4 centuries. The poem's desperate desire for order was a prophecy of the chaos to come. Dante gave the West its most complete vision of heaven, hell, and purgatory, and in doing so, he also gave it the template for a culture so in love with its own image that it would fail to notice the armies massing at the gates of the garden.
Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost. Inferno, Canto 1, lines 1 to 3. Consider your origin. You were not made to live as brutes, but to follow virtue and knowledge. Inferno, Canto 15, lines 118 to 120, Ulysses' speech. Love that moves the sun and the other stars. Paradiso, Canto 23, line 145, final line of the entire work.
(4) Martin Luther's 95. Theses and Bible translations, Renaissance Reformation, circa 16th century CE, the Holy Roman Empire, German states, fragmented Christendom. Protagonist journey. The conscience-bound individual, the believer, stands naked before God. The journey is inward, from reliance on institutional mediation, church, priest, pope, to personal faith, sola fide. The obstacle is the terrifying weight of divine judgment and the temporal power of Rome. The flaw embedded in the text. The assertion of sola scriptura, Scripture alone, an individual conscience, democratized faith, but also shattered the interpretive community. The flaw was the atomization of belief. Once the unified authority was broken, it was irreparable. This led not just to Protestant freedom, but to a cascade of violent sectarianism, wars of religion, doctrinal splintering, and a new kind of tyranny, the state church replacing the universal church. The individual was freed from the Pope, but often made subject to the local prince's interpretation of God. How the meme went viral. The fragmentation of Christendom was the death knell for the Holy Roman idea. The schism directly foreshadowed the decline of a unified European soul, the very tool used to build a new piety. The printing press and vernacular text became the weapon that destroyed the old world and fueled the nationalism and secularism of the next centuries.
The true treasure of the Church is the most holy gospel of the glory and grace of God. Thesis 62. Unless I am convinced by the testimony of the Scriptures or by clear reason, I am bound by the Scriptures I have quoted, and my conscience is captive to the Word of God. I cannot and will not recant anything, since it is neither safe nor right to go against conscience. Diet of Worms.
Five. Goethe's Faust, Enlightenment or Napoleonic era, 1789–1815 CE. The dominant empire embodying Faust is revolutionary and Napoleonic France, which, having guillotined its king and declared war on all of Europe's old regimes, discovered that the intoxicating freedom of limitless ambition and the belief that human will could reshape the world according to rational design also produced a bottomless appetite for conquest that could only end in self-destruction on the frozen plains of Russia. The protagonist journey. Faust, the titanic overreacher. The journey is a pact with Mephistopheles to experience all knowledge, all pleasure, and all power. The obstacle is the inherent limit of the human soul and the moral destruction left in the wake of ceaseless ambition. Gretchen's tragedy. The flaw embedded in the text. The ethos of limitless striving without moral anchor. Faust's pact is a license to transgress, to use knowledge, alchemy, and power to reshape reality regardless of the human cost, symbolized by the tragedy of Gretchen. Napoleon embodied this, a world historical genius who could reorder Europe's map, but whose ambition left millions dead and a continent in ruins. The flaw was the romantic belief that extraordinary will justifies any means. How the meme went viral. Faust implies that striving is its own redemption. He who ever strives. But the destruction left in the wake of Part 1 foreshadows the limits of the individual Superman. Napoleon's empire, like Faust's restless energy, collapsed not because it lacked power, but because it lacked a sustainable, peaceful foundation. It was a brilliant, catastrophic fire that consumed itself.
Two souls, alas, are dwelling in my breast, and one is striving to forsake its brother. Part 1, outside the city gate, that I may detect the inmost force which binds the world and guides its course. Part 1, night. Whoever strives with all his might, that man we can redeem. Part 2, Act 5.
Six. Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species. Victorian Industrial Era, 1837–1901 CE. The dominant empire embodying On the Origin of Species is the British Empire, which at the height of its industrial and colonial power found in Darwin's theory of natural selection both a triumphant vindication of its global supremacy and a creeping existential horror that the same blind, amoral forces that had raised Britannia to rule the waves would, with equal indifference, one day consign her to the fossil record. Protagonist journey. The species, collective organism, there is no individual hero. The protagonist is the tangled bank of life itself. The journey is adaptation through deep time. The obstacle is the Malthusian struggle for existence, the brutal, impersonal sieve of natural selection. The flaw embedded in the text. The misapplication of natural law to society, social Darwinism, and scientific racism. While Darwin described nature, Victorian society reproduced the struggle for existence as a moral imperative for laissez-faire capitalism and empire. The dark side of this text is the justification of inequality and colonial brutality as natural and progressive. It gave a veneer of scientific inevitability to the exploitation of the weak by the strong. How the meme went viral. The confidence in inevitable linear progress masked a deep anxiety. Darwin's world is one of blind chance, not divine design. This foreshadowed the 20th century collapse of Victorian optimism. If evolution is driven by random variation and brutal selection, then the peak of empire is not a permanent state. It is just a temporary adaptation before the next extinction event. The seeds of World War I's mechanized slaughter were sown in this new, godless view of struggle.
Thus, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely, the production of the higher animals, directly follows. Chapter 14, Conclusion. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. Paraphrase of Chapter 4.
Seven. Franz Kafka's The Trial. Modernist Era, 1914–1945 CE. The dominant empire embodying the trial is the sprawling, multi-ethnic Austro-Hungarian bureaucracy and its terrifying 20th century successors, which perfected the art of governing not through the visible hand of the tyrant, but through an infinite, self-replicating labyrinth of forms, files, and functionaries wherein the individual is crushed not by malice, but by the sheer indifferent weight of procedure. Protagonist journey. Joseph K. The Arrested Nobody. The journey is a descent into a labyrinth without a center. He seeks access to the law, but the obstacle is the distributed, anonymous, and impenetrable nature of the system itself. There is no sin, only procedure. The flaw embedded in the text. The total internalization of bureaucratic guilt. Joseph K. doesn't fight the system because he can't find it. He ends up accepting his execution. Modern societies reproduce this by creating systems so complex, legal, financial, algorithmic, that the individual accepts their powerlessness as a feature of reality. This is the Kafkaesque nightmare. You are not crushed by a tyrant, but by an indifferent, distributed network of procedures that treats you as a case file. How the meme went viral. The trial offers no decline. only the permanent state of decay. It suggests that modern times have no empire to fall. We have entered an endless labyrinth where the center of power is empty or unreachable. The foreshadowing is not of a sudden collapse, but of a slow, absurd erosion of agency and meaning. The bureaucracy is the empire, and its only product is more paperwork.
Someone must have been telling lies about Joseph K., for without having done anything wrong, he was arrested one fine morning. Opening line. The right perception of any matter and a misunderstanding of the same matter do not wholly exclude each other. Chapter 9. Like a dog, he said. It was as if the shame of it must outlive him. Closing line.
Eight. John Milton's Paradise Lost. Postmodern era, now into a succinct present. The dominant empire embodying Paradise Lost is the United States of America and the State of Israel, two nations founded upon the potent and perilous myth of divine election, the belief that they are a city on a hill or a promised land restored, and who now find themselves trapped in the excruciating postmodern condition of possessing the forbidden knowledge of their own historical sins, while being unable to relinquish the founding narrative of innocence that legitimizes their existence. Why Milton for the postmodern age? This is a counterintuitive, but deeply resonant choice. Paradise Lost is not a postmodern text in form, but it is the your text of the American-Israeli political mythos that defines the current era. The United States explicitly understood its founding as a new Eden and its expansion as a new Canaan. The crisis of the postmodern era is the deconstruction of that founding narrative. The realization that the chosen nation might possess the flaws of Satan's logic, non serviam, I will not serve, more than it resembles Edenic innocence. Protagonist's journey. Satan as the sympathetic rebel, Adam and Eve as the fallen elect. The journey is exile from the garden into history. The obstacle is the knowledge of good and evil, the realization that the pure ideological narrative of the nation was always already compromised by the violence of its founding and the paradox of power.
The mind is its own place and in itself can make a heaven of hell a hell of heaven. Book 1 Royal lines 254-255. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Book 1 line 263. So dear I love him, that with him all deaths I could endure, without him live no life. Book 9. Eve's decision that binds the human condition to choice over obedience. The world was all before them, where to choose, their place of rest, and providence their guide. They hand in hand with wandering steps and slow, through Eden took their solitary ways. Book 2, closing lines.
The flaw embedded in the text. Milton's Satan is the ultimate charismatic demagogue. He convinces the angels and the reader that rebellion is heroic. The postmodern empire, USA, reproduces this by mistaking rebellion for freedom. It creates a society of radical individualism. Satan's mind is its own place, where no common truth can be agreed upon, leading to paralysis and internal war. Simultaneously, the myth of the New Eden justifies a permanent state of exception and expansion, the belief that the chosen nation can transcend the moral laws that bind others, a logic that mirrors Satan's claim that he is self-begot and owes no debt to a higher order. The empire becomes trapped in a cycle of asserting its own divine innocence while perpetually falling short of it, projecting its internal guilt onto external enemies. How the meme went viral. Paradise Lost ends not with a triumph, but with solitary wandering. The couple leaves the gate. There is no empire here, only exile. This foreshadows the decline of the American century, not a loud, dramatic fall like Rome, but a slow, sad walking away from the unifying myth, hand in hand with loss, into an uncertain, post-consensus landscape. The city on a hill becomes just a hill. The text foreshadows that a nation founded on the premise of innocence cannot survive the acquisition of knowledge. The awareness of its own historical sins, colonial dispossession, slavery, imperial overreach. Like Adam and Eve, the postmodern empire is condemned to wander in a world where providence is no longer a clear, guiding voice but a distant, contested memory. The gates of Eden are shut, guarded by dreadful faces, thronged and fiery arms. There is no going back to the founding myth. There is only the hard, unglamorous work of making a life in the fallen world of history. Conclusion. The map precedes the territory. We began with the premise that these books are memes, and we end with the uncomfortable suspicion that the map came first. In the logic of Jean Baudrillard, we have entered the age of the simulacrum, the copy without an original. The Iliad was not a description of Greek honor. It was the hyper-real model of honor that the Greeks then attempted, often disastrously, to inhabit. The Aeneid was not a chronicle of Roman duty. It was the simulation of duty that demanded the erasure of the actual breathing human being. By the time we reach Milton, the process is complete. America did not write the story of Eden. The story of Eden wrote America. And now America finds itself trapped inside a narrative from which it cannot wake. Art does not imitate life. The subconscious of a civilization, once poured into a foundational text, becomes a procession of simulacra. The book erases the messy, contingent reality of history and replaces it with a clean, compelling, and ultimately fatal copy. We have spent 3,000 years mistaking the map for the territory, and then acting surprised when the ground beneath our feet gives way exactly where the map indicated a fault line. Each successive theme in this genealogy, rage, duty, faith, conscience, striving, struggle, absurdity, and innocence, is not a discovery. It is an aesthetic correction, a new filter applied to the lens, a new simulation designed to conceal the terrifying truth that there is no destination at the end of the wandering. The books are not windows into the soul of the West. They are the walls of the labyrinth, and we have been reading them from the inside the entire time. As always, good luck with that.